The great chamber of Concordia Prime stretched 500 meters across, its ceiling lost in artificial mist that glowed with soft blue light. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the human podium, a small circle of metal barely 2 meters wide, surrounded by 47 other platforms that rose like towers around her. Some held creatures 3 times her height. Others hosted beings that floated in containment fields or rested in pools of liquid methane. She had practiced her speech for weeks. Every word had been chosen carefully, translated into 16 major galactic languages and reviewed by Earth's best diplomatic minds. Today, she would present humanity's proposal to help the suffering colonies in the frontier reaches. War had destroyed their worlds. Millions needed food, medicine, and shelter. Earth had the resources and the will to help. Elena began to speak. Her voice carried through the chamber's translation system, converted instantly into sounds and thoughts that every species could understand. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she said, "I come before you today not to ask for permission but to seek cooperation. The worlds of the frontier reaches are dying. Children starve while we debate. Earth proposes a humanitarian mission." Laughter interrupted her. Not polite disagreement or quiet skepticism. Actual laughter that echoed from a dozen different platforms. Elena paused. She had expected resistance. The elder species did not like humans challenging their authority. But open mockery in the council chamber violated every rule of diplomatic courtesy. The laughter grew louder. On platform 17, Councillor Thexkar of the Zithkara hive clicked his mandibles together in a sound that the translators rendered as amused chittering. His 4 eyes gleamed with something that looked like contempt. "The human speaks of helping," Thexkar announced. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "Tell me, Ambassador, how many years has your species possessed faster than light travel?" 15. "We of the Zithkara have sailed between stars for 90,000 years, and you presume to teach us about humanitarian aid." More laughter rippled through the chamber. Elena kept her face neutral. Her military training helped with that. She had commanded a destroyer squadron before becoming a diplomat. She knew how to remain calm under fire. "Experience and wisdom are valuable," Elena replied, "but the frontier reaches have been suffering for 3 years. If experience has not yet solved their problems, perhaps a fresh perspective." Fresh perspective. The voice came from platform 32. Councillor Vren of the Talo Consortium waved his tentacles in a gesture Elena had learned meant dismissal. "You mean inexperience. You mean the enthusiasm of children who do not understand the complexity of galactic politics." Elena felt her jaw tighten. She forced herself to relax. "With respect, Counselor, I mean the perspective of a species that remembers what it is like to struggle. Earth itself was divided and suffering not so long ago. We understand. You understand nothing." Thexkar rose from his platform. His massive form towered over the chamber. "Your species barely survived its own adolescence. You discovered atomic power and nearly destroyed yourselves. You poisoned your own world and fought endless wars over imaginary lines on the ground. And now, after 15 years in space, you believe you can lecture civilizations that were ancient when your world was still cooling." The chamber filled with sounds that the translators struggled to interpret. Clicking, humming, low rumbles. All of them conveyed agreement with Thexkar's words. Elena glanced at the human delegation behind her. 3 junior diplomats sat quietly, their faces carefully blank. Beyond them, in the observation gallery, representatives from smaller species watched. Some looked uncomfortable. Simply observed as if this was normal. "The frontier reaches need help now," Elena said. She kept her voice level. "Earth has medical teams ready. We have food supplies. We have construction drones. We ask only for council coordination to—" "Coordination?" Vren's laugh was like water bubbling. "You ask us to coordinate with species that still kills each other over religious differences? That allows corporations to exploit its own people? That cannot even agree on how to govern a single planet." Elena felt heat rising in her chest. Everything Vren said was true. Earth still had problems, but they were trying. They were improving, and none of their imperfections changed the fact that people were dying. "Our imperfections do not erase our capacity for compassion," she said. "Compassion." Thexkar made the word sound like an insult. "You mean emotion. You mean making decisions based on feelings rather than logic. This is why your species will never be more than junior members of this council. You are too young. too emotional, too certain that your brief existence has taught you universal truths. He turned to address the full council. I propose we table all human proposals indefinitely. Let them learn by observation. Let them sit quietly and watch how actual civilization functions. Perhaps in a few centuries, when they have matured, we can revisit their membership status. Elena opened her mouth to protest. The words died in her throat as she saw the voting displays activate across the chamber. Species after species signaled their agreement. The numbers appeared on her podium screen. 46 votes to table. 1 vote against the Lyran, a small mammalian species that traded heavily with Earth. 1 abstention from the Kelvorian Empire, whose representative looked uncomfortable but unwilling to oppose the majority. Not a single elder species had voted against the motion. Elena stood frozen as the gavel sound echoed through the chamber. The decision was final. All human proposals would be ignored. All human concerns dismissed. Earth's voice in the council had been reduced to nothing. This session is concluded, the council presider announced. May wisdom guide us all. The platforms began to lower. Delegates started to leave. Some looked at Elena with what might have been sympathy. Most simply ignored her, already discussing other matters. Elena walked back to the human delegation area. Her junior diplomat stood as she approached. No one spoke. What was there to say? In her earpiece, she heard Secretary General James Chen's voice, transmitted from Earth via quantum link. I watched everything, Elena. You did well. They humiliated us, Elena said quietly. They revealed themselves, Chen corrected. Return to Earth. We need to have a very serious conversation about humanity's place in this council. Elena nodded. She gathered her materials and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Thexkar speaking to another delegate. Finally, the Zithkara counselor said, the chattering children will learn to be silent. Elena paused at the doorway. She looked back at the great chamber, at the platforms and the delegates and the illusion of unity. Then she left. She did not know it yet, but that would be the last time a human voice spoke in the council chamber for a very long time. And when humans finally spoke again, the entire galaxy would listen. The message traveled to Earth at the speed of light, riding quantum channels through the void. It reached Geneva headquarters 8 hours later. Secretary General Chen read Elena's full report. He read the transcripts. He watched the recordings. Then he called an emergency session of Earth's Security Council. The discussion lasted 12 hours. When it ended, Chen made a single announcement that would change everything. Recall all human ambassadors, he ordered. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from active participation in the Galactic Council. We will maintain observer status, but nothing more. Let the Council govern without our voice. Let them see what the galaxy looks like when humans stop speaking. The order went out across human space. Ambassadors began packing their belongings. Ships prepared for departure, and in the great chamber of Concordia Prime, the human podium stood empty. The silence had begun. The human delegation quarters on Concordia Prime took 3 days to empty. Ambassador Elena Vasquez supervised the process personally. Every file, every piece of equipment, every fragment of human presence was packed into cargo containers and loaded onto transport ships. The other species barely noticed. A few junior diplomats from friendly delegations stopped by to express quiet regret. Most simply watched from a distance, uncertain what to say. On the morning of the 4th day, Elena stood in the empty reception hall one last time. The walls showed holographic images of Earth, blue oceans, green forests, the lights of cities at night. She deactivated the displays. The walls went dark. Ambassador? Her assistant, David Park, waited at the door. The last shuttle is ready. Elena nodded. She took one final look at the space that had represented humanity's hopes for galactic partnership. Then she walked out. The doors sealed behind her with a soft hiss. Secretary General Chen's message had been brief. Earth was withdrawing from active council participation pending internal review. No anger, no threats. Just a simple statement of fact. The council received the message during their next regular session. The presider read it aloud. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Most seemed relieved. Perhaps the humans will return when they have matured, Councillor Thexkar said. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction. Silence will teach them what words could not. The vote to accept Earth's withdrawal was unanimous. The human podium was officially marked as inactive. The council moved on to other business. Weeks passed. The Great Chamber continued its eternal debates. Laws were proposed and rejected. Trade agreements were negotiated. Border disputes were mediated. Everything functioned exactly as it always had, but small changes began to appear, like cracks spreading through ice. The first sign came from the trade networks. Human merchant ships had always been common in council space. They were not the largest vessels or the fastest, but they were reliable. Human traders went everywhere, carried everything, and rarely asked questions. They were the connective tissue of a dozen smaller trade routes. Now those ships were leaving. Not dramatically. They simply finished their contracts and did not renew them. They returned to human space and stayed there. This is temporary, Trade Counselor Myrath assured her colleagues. They are making a point. They will return when they realize they need our markets more than we need their services. But the human ships did not return, and the trade routes they had serviced began to slow. Deliveries took longer. Costs increased. Minor species who depended on human transport started filing complaints. The second sign came from the research networks. Humans had been enthusiastic participants in galactic science. They lacked the advanced knowledge of elder species, but they asked interesting questions. They approached problems from unexpected angles. They collaborated freely and shared their findings. Now those collaborations ended. Human scientists published their final papers and withdrew from joint projects. Invitations to conferences went unanswered. Requests for data were politely declined with the same phrase. Earth is conducting an internal review. Good riddance, announced Councillor Breck of the Viridian Assembly. Their primitive theories were cluttering serious research anyway. But several ongoing projects stalled without human participation. A cure for Calvorian degenerative syndrome had been close to completion. The human bioengineers had been responsible for the protein synthesis model. Without them, the research team could not proceed. The third sign came from the colonies. The council maintained detailed records of every settlement in known space. Population, resources, economic activity, all of it tracked and analyzed. The data helped predict problems and allocate aid. Human colonies stopped submitting their reports. Not aggressively. They simply stopped responding to council surveys. Requests were acknowledged but not fulfilled. Census takers were turned away politely at system borders. They are behaving like children, Thexcar declared, petulant and stubborn. This proves they were never ready for council membership. But the loss of human colony data created gaps in the council's economic models. Predictions became less accurate. Resource allocation became more difficult. The fourth sign was military. Human warships had always been few in council space. Earth maintained a small defensive fleet and did not project power beyond its own borders. The council considered this proof of human weakness. Now those few warships withdrew completely. They returned to the Sol system and to the human colonies. They disappeared from shared patrol routes and joint exercises. Requests for coordination went unanswered. The Council Military Commission barely noticed. Let them hide in their home system, Commission Chair Varn said. We have maintained peace for 10,000 years without human help. But a few security analysts quietly noted the withdrawal. They wondered what Earth was doing with its fleets. They wondered why a species would pull back all its military assets unless it was preparing for something. Months passed. The council continued to function, but more delegates began to notice the absence. Not because humans had been important, but because the spaces they had filled were now empty. Human medical teams had been working on 15 different worlds, providing free healthcare to species whose own governments had abandoned them. Those teams left. The clinics closed. The sick went untreated. Human agricultural specialists had been helping terraforming colonies optimize their crop yields. They left. Some colonies began to struggle with food production. Human engineers had been maintaining fusion drill equipment on mining asteroids throughout council space. The drills were human-designed and leased to other species. The engineers left. The equipment began to malfunction. This is blackmail, Thexacar insisted during a council session. They are trying to force us to beg for their return. But Earth sent no demands. Earth said nothing at all. Every official message from Geneva was the same. Earth is conducting an internal review. The council tried to contact Earth directly. Diplomatic messages were acknowledged but not answered with substance. Trade proposals were politely declined. Requests for meetings were noted and filed. Earth maintained its observer status, technically still a council member but entirely passive. The human podium stood empty in the great chamber. Some delegates had started to find it unnerving. The absence was like a missing tooth, constantly noticeable. Perhaps we should invite them back, suggested Councillor Maratoth of the ancient Valar civilization. Formally, with appropriate ceremony, and admit we were wrong? Thexkar's mandibles clacked sharply. Never. They will return on their own, or they will remain isolated. Either way, the council endures. But in the gallery above the chamber, where smaller species sent their observers, quiet conversations were happening. Representatives from species that were not full council members whispered to each other during breaks. The humans helped us build our water treatment system, one said. No one else would. They asked for nothing in return. Earth sent medical supplies when the plague hit our colonies, another added. The council sent forms to fill out. Do you think they would talk to us? Directly? I do not know, but perhaps it is worth asking. These conversations did not reach the council floor. The elder species did not pay attention to what minor species discussed among themselves. They were too busy debating tariff structures and territorial boundaries, and so the silence continued. Earth said nothing. Human ships stayed away. Human voices disappeared from galactic networks. It was as if humanity had decided the galaxy was not worth their attention. Councillor Thexkar gave a speech celebrating the peace and quiet. Finally, he said, the chattering children have learned their place. Silence suits them. The council applauded. The vote of approval was unanimous. None of them realized that humanity was not learning to be quiet. Humanity was learning who their real friends were, and Earth was very busy preparing for what would come next. The silence had only just begun. 3 months after the silence began, the medical crisis hit Rigel IV. The colony was home to 7 million Kelvorians, a species with complex biology that required specialized surgical techniques for common injuries. 10 years earlier, human doctors had developed a new procedure that reduced surgery time by 60% and improved survival rates dramatically. They had taught it to Kelvorian medical teams and left the equipment behind. Now a factory accident had injured 300 workers. They needed immediate surgery. The local doctors prepared their equipment and discovered a problem. The human-designed surgical tools had worn out. They needed replacement parts that only Earth manufactured. The hospital administrator sent an urgent request to Earth. The message was acknowledged, but received no response. They contacted the council, requesting emergency procurement of the parts. The Council Health Commission reviewed the request and began the approval process. That process took 4 weeks. By then, 70 patients had died from injuries that should have been survivable. The news spread quickly through galactic media networks. Rigel IV held public funerals for the dead. The families blamed the council for slow response and blamed Earth for abandoning them. Neither party responded to the criticism. 2 weeks later, agricultural collapse began on Kepler's paradise. The colony grew modified grain that fed 40 billion people across 6 star systems. The grain was engineered by human agricultural scientists who had combined Earth wheat with local plants to create something new. It grew faster, yielded more, and resisted disease better than any native crop. But the genetic modifications required constant monitoring. Small adjustments had to be made each generation to keep the plant stable. The human technicians who understood this process had returned to Earth. The local farmers tried to maintain the crops themselves, but they lacked the deep knowledge needed. The grain began to fail. First one field, then dozens, then entire regions. The plants grew twisted and weak. The yields dropped by 30%, then 50, then 70. Kepler's paradise sent desperate messages to Earth. They needed the technicians back. They needed the genetic data that would tell them how to fix the problem. Earth acknowledged the messages but sent no help. The Council Agriculture Committee reviewed the crisis. They sent their own experts to study the problem. Those experts examined the failing crops and delivered their report. The modifications are extremely complex, the report stated. We can identify what is wrong, but cannot determine how to fix it without the original research data. That data is proprietary human information. Without cooperation from Earth, we cannot save these crops. The committee debated for 2 weeks about whether to demand that Earth share the data. They finally voted to send a formal request. Earth's response arrived within a day. The research data you request is intellectual property of Earth-based institutions. We have no legal obligation to share it with the Council. Earth is conducting an internal review. Kepler's Paradise began emergency food imports from other systems. The cost was staggering. Millions faced hunger while politicians argued about property rights and diplomatic protocols. The industrial slowdown came next, spreading like a disease across 40 star systems. Humans had contributed more to galactic industry than anyone had realized. They had developed logistics algorithms that optimized shipping routes. They had designed maintenance schedules for equipment that reduced downtime. They had created supply chain management software that predicted demand and prevented shortages. Most species had adopted these tools without thinking much about where they came from. The systems worked, and that was enough. Now the systems were failing. The algorithms still ran, but they needed regular updates to account for changing conditions. The maintenance schedules required adjustment as equipment aged. The supply chain software needed human oversight to handle unexpected problems. Without human support, everything began to run less efficiently. Ships took longer routes. Equipment broke down more often. Shortages appeared in unexpected places. Nothing stopped completely, but everything became slower and more expensive. "This is sabotage," Councillor Vren declared. "The humans deliberately made us dependent on their systems, and now they punish us for their own arrogance." But the Council's own investigation showed something different. Humans had not made anyone dependent on them. Other species had chosen to adopt human innovations because they worked better than the alternatives. The humans had shared freely, asked for little in return, and never suggested they might someday withdraw their support. The investigation report was quietly filed away. No one wanted to admit that the Council had taken human contributions for granted. Mining operations across the outer colonies began to fail. Human fusion drill technology had revolutionized asteroid mining. The drills could cut through solid rock 10 times faster than traditional methods. Dozens of mining companies had leased the equipment from Earth. The leases had included maintenance agreements. Human engineers would service the drills and replace worn components. But those engineers had gone home. The drills continued to work for a while, but complex machinery always needs maintenance. Parts wore out. Systems misaligned. Performance degraded. The mining companies tried to service the drills themselves. Some succeeded. Most did not. The equipment was sophisticated, and the technical manuals assumed knowledge that only human engineers possessed. Production dropped. Ore shipments decreased. Prices increased. Industries that depended on cheap raw materials began to struggle. The Council Mining Commission sent urgent requests to Earth. They offered to pay premium rates for human engineers to return. Earth acknowledged the requests and declined without explanation. "They want us to beg," Thexkar said bitterly. "They want us to admit we need them." But Earth sent no demands, no ultimatums, no conditions for return, just silence. Secretary General Chen gave a single public address during this period. It was broadcast on Earth's public channels but not sent to the Council. "Some have suggested that Earth is punishing the galaxy," Chen said. His voice was calm and measured. "This is not true. We are simply taking care of our own people and our own interests. We have obligations to our citizens that must take priority. The galaxy will continue just fine without us." The speech was analyzed by every major intelligence service in Council space. They searched for hidden meanings, implied threats, or secret demands. They found none. Chen seemed to mean exactly what he said. This confused the Council more than any threat would have. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Something the Council leadership did not notice because they were not paying attention to minor species. Human ships began appearing at colonies that were not Council members. Small delegations arrived at independent worlds. They came quietly, without announcement, and they came with offers. Earth is establishing direct relationships with interested parties, the human diplomats explained. "We would like to discuss trade agreements, technology exchanges, and mutual defense pacts." The minor species were surprised. Some were suspicious. Most were interested. "What does Earth want in return?" they asked. "Fair partnership," the humans said. "We share what we have. You share what you have. We help each other." No superiority. No mockery. Just mutual respect. It seemed too simple. But the humans had helped many of these species before. They had provided aid without strings attached. They had treated small colonies with the same respect they showed to powerful empires. Slowly, Carefully, agreements began to form. The Council Intelligence Services finally noticed when 12 minor species signed formal trade treaties with Earth in the same week. The treaties bypassed Council oversight entirely. They were bilateral agreements between equals. "This is unacceptable," Thexkar declared. "They are building a rival power block. They are trying to split the galaxy." Or, Councillor Maritoth said quietly, "They are simply making friends with species we have long ignored." The emergency session lasted 6 hours. Delegates argued about what Earth was trying to accomplish. Some insisted it was a conspiracy. Others suggested it was simple economics. A few began to wonder if humanity was making a point about how the Council treated its own members. No consensus emerged. The session ended with a vote to monitor Earth's activities and report any threatening behavior. Earth's response to being monitored was the same as their response to everything else. Silence. The human podium in the Great Chamber remained empty, but now that emptiness felt less like absence and more like refusal. The Council had thought humans would come back once they realized they needed the galaxy. Instead, the galaxy was beginning to realize it needed humans, and humanity was showing no signs of returning. 6 months after the silence began, the Krinthar Empire attacked the Velos Cluster. The Velos Cluster was not part of the Council. It was an alliance of 7 independent colonies on the galactic rim. They had rejected Council membership because they valued their autonomy. The Council had always viewed them as primitive and irrelevant. The Krinthar were a warrior species who respected only strength. They had been expanding their territory for decades, absorbing smaller civilizations through conquest. The Council tolerated this because the Krinthar usually attacked targets outside Council space. The Velos Cluster had resources the Krinthar wanted: rich mineral deposits, strategic location, and no significant military to defend it. The attack began without warning. Krinthar warships appeared in the Velos system and began orbital bombardment of the 3 most populated worlds. They did not offer surrender terms. They simply attacked. Within hours, millions were dead. The cluster's defense fleet tried to fight back and was destroyed in less than a day. The survivors sent desperate distress calls in every direction. The Council received the first calls within 6 hours. The Emergency Military Commission convened immediately. Delegates watched the footage from Velos, cities burning, refugees fleeing, children crying in the wreckage. "We must intervene," declared Councillor Lyra of the Lyran Confederation. Her species had been the only one to vote against silencing humanity. Now she stood alone again, demanding action. "The Velos Cluster rejected our protection," Thexkar responded. "They chose independence. Let them face the consequences. They are being slaughtered." Lyra's voice cracked with emotion. "Which is regrettable," Thexkar said. His tone suggested he found it only mildly regrettable. But the Council must consider broader implications. If we intervene every time an independent colony faces consequences for their choices, we encourage others to reject Council authority. The debate continued for 3 days while people died. Some delegates argued for immediate military response. Others wanted diplomatic negotiations with the Krinthar. A few suggested offering the cluster membership in exchange for Council protection. The Krinthar ignored all diplomatic overtures. They continued their assault, methodically destroying infrastructure and herding the population into containment zones. On the 4th day, while the Council was still debating, human ships appeared in the Velos system, not a few ships. An entire fleet. 37 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. They were not the small defensive ships that other species had seen near Earth. These were warships, real ones, heavily armed and clearly built for combat. The lead ship broadcast a message on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. We are here to evacuate civilians and provide humanitarian protection. Any vessel that attacks refugees or interferes with rescue operations will be treated as hostile." The Krinthar commander responded with mockery. "Humans, the Council's pet species? Return to your home system before we add you to our list of conquests." The human fleet did not respond with words. What happened next shocked every military analyst in the galaxy. The human ships moved with precision that suggested years of training. They deployed in formations that looked simple but proved devastatingly effective. They used weapons no one knew Earth possessed. The Krinthar attacked. It was a mistake. Human point defense systems intercepted every missile. Human electronic warfare blinded Krinthar sensors. Human railguns, firing solid projectiles at impossible velocities, punched through Krinthar shields like they were not there. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, 8 Krinthar warships were destroyed and the rest were retreating at maximum speed. The human fleet had not lost a single vessel. While half the fleet held the line, the other half began evacuation operations. Human transport ships descended to the 3 besieged worlds. Marines secured landing zones. Medical teams set up triage centers. Evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. The humans rescued 4,300,000 people in 72 hours. They took injured, elderly, and children first. They provided food, water, and medical care. They asked for nothing in return. The council watched in stunned silence. Intelligence services scrambled to analyze the human military capabilities they had just witnessed. Where had these ships come from? When had humanity developed such advanced weapons? Why had they hidden this strength? They were never weak, Counselor Maratoth said quietly during an emergency session. We assumed they were weak because they chose diplomacy. We mistook preference for inability. Admiral Chen established a humanitarian corridor around the Velos worlds. Human ships patrolled constantly, preventing Krinthar return. They set up temporary colonies on the moons where refugees could shelter safely. And through all of this, Earth still refused to speak to the Council. The Council sent urgent messages requesting coordination. They offered to send their own ships to support the humans. They suggested joint command structures. Admiral Chen's response was brief. Earth operations in the Velos cluster are conducted under independent authority. We do not require Council support. All humanitarian questions should be directed to Earth Rescue Coordination. It was not hostile. It was simply factual. Earth was handling the situation without Council involvement. The galactic media networks exploded with coverage. Images of human soldiers carrying wounded children. Videos of human doctors working 20-hour shifts. Testimonials from refugees who spoke of the kindness and efficiency of their rescuers. One video went viral across the galaxy. It showed a human marine, a young woman barely 20 years old, giving her own rations to a Velocian family. When asked why, she said simply, "Because they are hungry and I am not." The Council's own inaction looked worse with each passing day. While they had debated for 3 days, humans had traveled across the galaxy to help people who were not their responsibility, not their allies, and not even Council members. Public opinion began to shift dramatically. Protests erupted on 17 Council worlds. Citizens demanded to know why their governments had done nothing while humans risked their lives to save strangers. Where was the Council? Became a rallying cry. Several minor species formally requested bilateral treaties with Earth. They no longer wanted Council protection. They wanted the kind of protection humans had shown the Velos cluster. The Council leadership tried to save face. They offered to reimburse Earth for rescue costs. Earth declined. They offered formal recognition for humanity's humanitarian efforts. Earth acknowledged the offer but said nothing else. What do they want? Vren asked in frustration. They must want something. No species acts purely from altruism, but the humans kept saying nothing and kept acting. They finished the evacuation. They established refugee camps on 3 human colony worlds. They assigned permanent patrol ships to protect the Velos cluster. They treated the survivors with dignity and respect, and then they announced something that made the Council truly nervous. The Velos cluster and Earth have signed a mutual defense treaty. Admiral Chen announced, "Any future attacks on Velos will be considered attacks on Earth. We will respond accordingly." It was the first time Earth had committed to defending non-human territory. It was also the first time humanity had essentially dared another species to attack. The Krinthar Empire issued no response. Their warships stayed well away from Velos space. 23 minor species requested formal meetings with Earth diplomats. Not council sessions, private bilateral discussions. They wanted treaties. They wanted trade agreements. They wanted to know if Earth would protect them the way it had protected Velos. Earth agreed to all the meetings. The Council watched in horror as a parallel alliance network began to form. Not competing with the Council, simply existing separately from it. Species that had always been minor players were suddenly finding their voice, and that voice was speaking to Earth, not to the Council chambers. Thexkar's position became untenable. His own delegation began to question his judgment. Other Zithkara counselors pointed out that his mockery of humanity had led directly to this crisis. Perhaps, one suggested carefully, we should apologize and invite the humans back. Never, Thexkar said, but his mandibles clicked with less certainty than before. The human podium remained empty, but now everyone in the great chamber was acutely aware of that emptiness. They had thought humans would need them. Instead, the galaxy was learning that humans did not need the council at all, and that realization terrified the elder species more than any weapon could. 8 months after the silence began, the council called an emergency summit. The great chamber filled with delegates from every member species. The galleries overflowed with observers. Media drones hovered everywhere, broadcasting to billions across the galaxy. Everyone knew this session would determine the future of galactic governance. The human delegation's seats remained empty. Councillor Maratoth, eldest of the Veiler and one of the council's founding species, called the session to order. She was over 600 years old and her voice carried the weight of centuries. We face a crisis, she began, not of military threat or economic collapse, though both loom. We face a crisis of legitimacy. The people we claim to serve are asking why the council exists if it cannot act with compassion and courage. They are asking why humans, who we dismissed as children, showed more wisdom than species who have ruled for millennia. Thexkar started to object. Maratoth silenced him with a gesture. I was here when this council formed 10,000 years ago, she continued. I remember why we created it. We wanted to prevent war. We wanted to facilitate cooperation. We wanted to help younger species develop safely. Somewhere along the way, we forgot those goals. We became focused on maintaining our own power and status. We mistook age for wisdom and experience for virtue. She paused, letting her words sink in. The humans showed us what we have become. They held up a mirror and we did not like what we saw. So we mocked them. We silenced them. And they responded not with anger but with withdrawal. They simply stopped participating in a system that did not respect them. They abandoned their responsibilities, Vren interjected. No, Maratoth said firmly. We abandoned ours. The humans have spent 8 months proving that they do not need us. They have saved lives while we debated. They have built alliances while we clung to hierarchy. They have acted while we talked. And now we must decide what kind of council we want to be. The chamber fell silent. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Councillor Lyra of the Lyran stood. I request that Earth be formally invited to return. With full apology for our conduct. With recognition that we were wrong. I second that request, said Councillor Thren of the Talo Consortium. Even Vren looked surprised at this betrayal from his own species. We should also consider structural reforms, added Councillor Pax of the Kelvorian Empire. The humans were right. This council gives too much power to elder species and too little voice to younger ones. If we want them back, we must show them a council worth returning to. The debate began. It was passionate, but for the first time in months, productive. Species that had never questioned council structure suddenly saw its flaws. The system that had seemed eternal now looked fragile. After 6 hours of discussion, Maratoth called for a vote on a formal invitation to Earth. The result was overwhelming. 41 species in favor, 3 abstentions, and 3 against. Even Thexkar's own delegation split, with several junior Zithkara counselors voting yes despite their elders' objections. The invitation was drafted carefully. It acknowledged the council's mistakes. It offered formal apology. It requested humanity's return to active participation. It was sent to Earth immediately. The response came back within an hour. Secretary General Chen will address the council via holographic link. He declines to attend in person. The message was clear. Earth would speak, but on their own terms. The holographic projector activated at the center of the great chamber. Chen's image appeared life-sized and perfectly clear. He stood in his office in Geneva, Earth visible through the window behind him. He wore a simple dark suit. His expression was calm but firm. Counselors, he began, I have received your invitation. I appreciate the sentiment behind it. But before Earth can consider returning, we must be clear about what that means. He paused, letting the silence stretch. 8 months ago, Ambassador Vasquez stood where my image now stands. She asked for your cooperation in saving lives. You laughed at her. You called us children. You dismissed our concerns and our capabilities. You were not kind. You were not diplomatic. You were cruel. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. But cruelty is forgivable, Chen continued. We understand that fear often masks itself as contempt. What concerns us more is the system that allowed such cruelty to flourish. This council claims to represent all species, but it clearly values some species more than others. It claims to promote cooperation, but it dismisses ideas that come from the wrong source. It claims to care about the galaxy's welfare, but it debates while people die. He let them sit with that for a moment. Earth will not return to participate in such a system. We will not subject our diplomats to mockery. We will not waste our time making proposals that will be ignored. We will not be junior partners in a hierarchy based on age rather than merit. What do you want? Thexkar demanded. What demands must we meet for you to return? Chen's expression did not change. We make no demands. Earth does not need the council anymore. We have proven that over these past 8 months. We can trade without you. We can conduct research without you. We can protect those who need protection without you. We can build alliances based on mutual respect rather than ancient hierarchy. He gestured and new images appeared in the air around him. 23 species emblems representing the minor species who had signed treaties with Earth. We have formed something new. We call it the Free Worlds Coalition. 23 species so far, with more requesting membership every day. We offer simple terms: equality, mutual support, and respect. No species is more important than another. Decisions are made democratically. All voices matter equally. The council erupted. Delegates shouted over each other. Some called it treachery. Others called it inevitable. A few quietly wondered if they could join. Chen waited for the noise to die down. The coalition is not meant to replace the council, he said. It is simply an alternative for species who want something different. You are welcome to continue as you have for 10,000 years, but you will do so knowing that you are no longer the only option. You are splitting the galaxy, Vren accused. No, Chen said calmly. We are offering choice. Species can remain in the council, join the coalition, or participate in both. That is for each species to decide. But we will not compromise our principles to maintain an artificial unity. Maratoth spoke into the chaos. What would it take for Earth to return to this council? Not to the coalition. To us. Chen looked at her with something that might have been respect. Structural reform, he said simply. Equal voting rights for all member species, regardless of age or size. Democratic decision-making, rapid response protocols for humanitarian crises, accountability for delegates who abuse their positions. Show us a council that serves all its members equally, and we will consider participating in it. Those reforms would take years to implement, Thexkar protested. Then they should have been implemented centuries ago, Chen replied. Earth is patient. We will wait. In the meantime, we will continue working with those who share our values. The galaxy is large enough for multiple approaches to cooperation. He prepared to disconnect, then paused. One final thing. Counselor Thexkar called us children 8 months ago. Perhaps he was right. Children ask uncomfortable questions. Children notice when the Emperor has no clothes. Children believe that things can be better. If that makes us childish, then we embrace it. Because from where we stand, your ancient wisdom looks a lot like stagnation. The hologram disappeared. The chamber exploded into argument. Some delegates demanded immediate reforms. Others insisted the council could not be changed. A few quietly contacted Earth's representatives to ask about coalition membership. Thexkar tried to rally support for rejecting Earth's position entirely. But his own delegation voted to censure him for his treatment of humanity. He was removed from his council seat that same day. The vote for structural reform came 3 weeks later. It passed by a narrow margin. 24 species in favor, 23 against. Not overwhelming, but enough. The Concordia Accords were drafted over the following months. Equal voting rights, democratic processes, humanitarian response protocols, accountability measures. Everything Earth had suggested and more. 6 months later, Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Great Chamber. She walked to the human podium that had stood empty for over a year. Around her, the chamber was packed with delegates who had voted for reform. As she took her position, something unprecedented happened. 2/3 of the delegates stood and applauded. Not polite diplomatic clapping. Real applause that echoed through the chamber. Elena looked around at the faces that had mocked her a year ago. Some looked ashamed. Others looked hopeful. A few, like Maritoth, looked satisfied. "Thank you," Elena said simply. "Earth is honored to return to active participation in a council that values all its members equally. We look forward to working together to build a better galaxy." She sat down. The human podium was no longer empty, but neither was Earth's influence limited to this chamber. The Free Worlds Coalition continued to grow. The galaxy now had two major governance bodies competing with ideas rather than weapons, showing different paths forward. Thank you for watching and comment for next part.